Hello, dear friends. Jesus expelled the Meccans from the temple, and now they have multiplied and spread all over the planet. There were few of them, and Grandma gave birth to them. I'm still talking in code. Opinion piece. Everything is a market. War against freedom. Economics triumphs over politics. Every living being is commodified and exploited. We are facing an embedded totalitarianism. It is an iron fist covered with a soft globe. It is the end of the self-sufficient and informed citizen. Scientific fact ceased to be in the 90s. Facts have been replaced by opinion polls. Legal concepts such as the free contract have been twisted. Experts were paid to marginalize natural remedies. All for the people, but without the people, like enlightened despotism. €10,000 cash transactions banned in the European Union. Treasury monitors €500 banknotes and incomes over 3,000 euros. World wheat supply falls due to droughts and floods. Grocery prices could rise to 14% higher in October. Russia uses climate engineering to fight forest fires. US government to run out of money by October or November. Let's start. We face inverted totalitarianism, to borrow philosopher Sheldon Wallin's term, a cultural and political state in which every aspect of our daily lives is controlled by multinational corporations without our knowledge, and we lose all freedom. As a result, our actions are profoundly constrained. We are constantly beaten by an iron fist covered with the soft globe of interest, loans, and constant surveillance. Our democracy is becoming an inverted totalitarianism, controlled by large corporations. The totalitarianism we face is inverted in the sense that we expect some dictator to be at the top, oppressing us out of personal greed, vanity, or cruelty. But the real source of our misery is rather the way they use supercomputers to calculate their profits and then extract as much money as possible from us by making it impossible for us to grow our own food, cure our own diseases, touch ourselves, or entertain ourselves. Instead, we must buy products online or in supermarkets in transactions with multinational corporations, and the banks will invariably take a significant cut. The only recognized and accredited lending is expensive, and it is also controlled and manipulated by large corporations. In addition, the role of artificial intelligence in the labor market has rapidly expanded. For example, with the proliferation of algorithmic hiring systems. According to one survey, 55% of leading HR companies already use predictive algorithms in hiring. Some artificial intelligence systems can be useful in reducing systemic biases, but others deepen discrimination. Definition: totalitarianism is a doctrine and political regimes developed during the 20th century in which the state concentrates all powers in a single party and coercively controls social relations under a single official ideology. Totalitarianism is the term for ideologies, movement, and political regimes where freedom is severely restricted and the state exercises all power without divisions or restrictions. Totalitarianisms or totalitarian regimes differ from other autocratic regimes in that they are led by a political party which pretends to be or behaves in practice as a single party and matches with the institutions of the state. In general, these regimes exalt the figure of a personage who has unlimited power that reaches all spheres and is manifested throughout hierarchically exercised authority. They promote a mass movement in which it is intended to frame the whole society by force, in order to form a new person in a supposedly perfect society, and they make an intense use of propaganda and different mechanisms of social control and repression. Embedded totalitarianism. Embedded totalitarianism is a term coined by political philosopher Sheldon Walling in 2003 to describe an emerging form of government. He uses the term to draw attention to the totalitarian aspects of the political system. He defined it also as the combination of a weak legislative body, a legal apparatus that is both compliant and repressive, a party system in which a party, whether in power or in opposition, is dedicated to maintaining the existing system to favor a ruling class composed of the rich and powerful. Embedded totalitarianism is described as a system where corporations have corrupted and subverted democracy, and where economic trumps politics. Every natural resource, a living thing, is commodified and exploited to the point of collapse as the citizenry is manipulated into surrendering their freedom and participation in government throughout excessive consumerism and sensationalist disinformation. Loss of freedom. A century ago began the process by which citizens lost their self-sufficiency in food production and energy production, and the basic skills of sewing, knitting, and carpentry increasingly dependent on products supplied by corporations. We can trace the current crisis to campaigns to force citizens to depend on oil throughout the promotion of automobiles and commerce, the slashing of public transportation budgets, and the massive funding of highways, the drive to mechanize agriculture, and the popularization of plastics. It also paid experts to marginalize homeopathic medicine and traditional treatments, and create dependence of the overpriced hospitals that are linked to corporations, while making universities and research institutes dependent on the benevolence of the rich, thus making systematic criticism of funding sources a taboo subject. Because they had such resources that they could lose money for years, it was almost undetectable how they reduced citizen autonomy. Equally important was the strategy of using short-term brain stimulation throughout flashy publications, instant messages, and news reports to reallocate connection between synapses so as to manipulate those most incapable of complex three-dimensional thinking. That service, for example, is the creation of a passive and dumped-down population, is a real product they offer to their real consumers. Control of the media. To be more specific, the invisible embedded totalitarianism that has taken control of our daily experiences dates back to the launch of Windows as an operating system in 1985. It set out to control the means by which citizens use their computers and later to control how they interact with each other over the internet. The next step in this hidden tyranny over our daily lives came in the form of search engines, social networks, and other massive interconnected corporations that mediated in the individual's interactions with the community, often taking over critical functions that previously belonged to the community or to non-profit institutions such as schools or research centers. Under the guise of greater convenience for the individual, entrepreneurs with a limited funding from investment banks were able to buy rivals, block alternatives that offered such engines as cooperatives, and thus created such engines that masquerade as transparent institutions, but make money throughout sophisticated means of manipulating human interactions throughout algorithms. Managed democracy. Managed democracy or guided democracy, also called managed democracy, is a government formally democratic that functions as de facto autocracy. Such governments are legitimized by supposedly free and fair elections, but do not change state policies, motives, and objectives. In other words, the government controls elections so that people can exercise all their rights supposedly without actually changing public policy. While following basic democratic principles, there can be major deviations toward authoritarianism. Under managed democracy, the continued use of propaganda techniques by the state prevents the electorate from having a meaningful impact on policy. Mao Zedong used the term guided democracy to refer to the regime of people's dictatorship he advocated, in which democracy is guided by centralism and freedom by discipline. Today it is widely used in Russia, where Kremlin theoreticians introduced it into common practice, despite the fall of communism. Princeton University professor Sheldon Walling describes this process as embedded totalitarianism. Totalitarian democracy is a term popularized by Israeli historian Yaakov Leib Talmon to refer to a system of government in which legally elected representatives maintain the integrity of a nation-state whose citizens, although granted the right to vote, have little or no say in the government's decision-making process. Polls. Another popular model to fall into tyranny is to frame opinion as content in the news without separating information from opinion. Scientific fact ceased to be central to the reports of the 90s. Instead, opinion polls of groups selected by polling companies are presented as confirmation of what is true. Public opinion polls are the propaganda equivalent of stock buybacks. The billionaires, having radically deregulated the economy and silenced the public, simply force their opinions on the public throughout the media they control, and then claim that the policies they want are demanded by the public. Contract. Legal concepts such as a contract have been twisted beyond recognition in the totalitarian cyberspace that surrounds us. A contract is a negotiated agreement between two parties. Online, however, where it is a decision to accept cookies or to comply with the rules of a commercial application, the user has no right to make demands on the corporation. He is given the false choice of accepting all the conditions offered or not having access to the service. The contract thus becomes a ritual void of freedom. We are used to allowing them to determine what happens to the information we share, and are unaware of the billions in profits these corporations make by selling the personal information, content, and creative ideas we provide without giving us any compensation. In a sense, these social networks are a form of virtual slavery because they are constantly giving them personal information to use for their business. Because citizens' thinking has been degraded for decades and citizens rely on corporate-sponsored sources for basic information, it was possible for the first time to create a crisis planned by the super-rich, promoted by the news sources they own, authorized by experts from the institutes and universities they fund, and legitimized by government agencies that have been privatized. Previously, a significant number of citizens were able to evaluate for themselves the veracity of the information. Research institutes such as Harvard University still had an ethical commitment to the scientific method and academic integrity. The process was made possible by the interaction of social networks, search engines, commercial media, and other critical components of everyday experience that determine opinions about reliable and authoritative voices. That process runs like an invisible dictatorship that controls a distracted, confused, and unfocused population drowned in connectivity. Nothing will improve until citizens recognized that the cause of this nightmare was not the end of the self-sufficient and informed citizens with access to expert writings and deep commitment to their scientific method and ethical principles. Economy. Wall Street continues to rebound on the back of corporate earnings. Strong quarterly earnings season is offsetting market concerns, and Wall Street is back on the rise and nearing all-time highs again. Stocks plunged. U.S. stocks extended their sell-off from last week on Monday, with key indexes falling about 2% each, as a resurgence in global growth cases and worries about global growth to a collapse of markets. U.S. government will run out of money by October or November, unless debt ceiling is raised. The U.S. government will most likely run out of money between October and November unless the Treasury debt ceiling is raised, the Congressional Budget Office warned Wednesday. Bitcoin catches air and reaches $31,300. Bitcoin, the world's most traded cryptocurrency, up more than 6%, not only regaining the 30,000 level, but also surpassing the $31,000 after falling sharply in the previous day to its lowest level in 2021. Russia renounces the dollar, stopping the use of dollars in transactions and applying an individual approach to each client. These are the main Russian countermeasures to the Western sanctions, stated the head of the Federal Service for Military Technical Cooperation, Dmitry Shugaev, Bank buffers don't work as expected in a crisis. Banks felt a stigma for dipping into their capital buffers to keep lending during market turbulence related to last year's health crisis, and the lessons should be learned, the Bank of England said Wednesday. Global wheat supplies are reduced due to drought of flooding, and the supply chain is faltering. Wheat crops are failing in the US, Canada, and Russia, the main exporters of the grain that feeds the rest of the world, as other producers, such as Kazakhstan, restrict their exports to protect their own people. Engineering attacks on supply chains continue from South Africa to Vietnam. Food prices are soaring as shortages cannot be hidden, and the real crisis of global food shortages looms. Grocery prices could rise by another 14% in October, warns CEO of a grocery chain. Families are already struggling amid rising price inflation that is eating into their budgets, with higher costs for housing, vehicles, and more. However, one top executive warns that the growing inflation problem could get much worse in the coming months. The latest data for June already shows price inflation at a 13-year high, with prices up to 5.4% year on year. SoftBank's robotic ambitions fail as PIPA loses power. When SoftBank Group Corp CEO Masayoshi Son unveiled the wide-eyed android PIPA in 2014, he painted a vision, one confined to science fiction, of a new era of personal robots in which his company would lead the industry. Europe. €10,000 crash transactions banned in the European Union. New control over our money by the European Union. Brussels lowers even more the amount to execute such control. Now it is €10,000 and in cash. The excuse is to avoid the laundering of capitals that supposes a fracture in the collection of taxes. This limit on transactions is already regulated in some European countries, such as Spain, where cash purchases of more than more than €1,000 are prohibited in Spain. Spain the limited €1,000 in cash, while in Greece the limit is €500. They want to control our own honestly earned money. The Spain Treasury is aware of any withdrawal or deposit of money that involves the use of €500 banknotes, as well as any deposit in an account that exceeds €3,000. It is the banks themselves who are responsible for reporting these movements, which may remain registered or started an investigation, especially if the origin of these resources is suspected. Short news. Germany counts cost of floods as hopes of finding survivors fade. A relief official on Wednesday dampened hopes on finding more survivors in the rubble of flood-ravaged villages in western Germany. As a poll showed, many Germans felt policymakers had not done enough to protect them. Germany approves €400 million aid for victims of devastating floods. The German Council of Ministers on Wednesday approved an allocation of €200 million to be doubled by aid from the affected Länder bringing the total of 400 million. The Council promised to quickly start the reconstruction of the devastated areas, a task whose cost is not yet clear, but is expected to run into billions. At the moment, it is believed that there has been damage of at least some 2 billion euros to roads and railways. US-Germany reached agreement on Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The US and Germany on Wednesday unveiled an agreement on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, under which Berlin pledged to respond to any attempt by Russia to use the energy as a weapon against Ukraine and other Central and Eastern European countries. Hands off my natural immunity. French protest against health pass. Hundreds of people protested in Paris, hundreds in plural, in Paris on Wednesday against the introduction of a health pass for some activities and against mandatory blessings, in quotes, for healthy workers. British Conservative MPs to vote against passes. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, not only angered a large section of the British public with his proposed health passports, he also infuriated his own MPs, many of whom have now pledged to vote against such a measure. Sweden tightens its immigration laws to stem the tide of asylum applications. New immigration rules have come into force in Sweden that make residence permits for refugees limited to a non-permanent from the outset. The law was passed by the Swedish Parliament last month. It replaces temporary legislation that was introduced 5 years ago in an attempt to reduce the record number of asylum applications. As a general rule, prior to the 2016 changes, since 1984, the Scandinavian country had always issued permanent resident permits to refugees and asylum seekers. Wildfire smoke causes air pollution across North America. Wildfires that swept across the western United States and Canada, including a 2-week-old monster blaze in Oregon, swept smoke and soot Tuesday eastward and caused noxious air pollution as far away as New York. Russia uses weather engineering to fight its wildfires, seeding silver iodide into clouds from an airplane to rain on the flames. Emergency workers responding to large wildfires in a remote region of Russia revealed they have been using weather engineering technology to cause rain clouds to help fight the inferno that is spreading across thousands of acres. US life expectancy falls to lowest level in nearly 20 years. Life expectancy in the US fell by a year and a half in 2020 to 77.3 years, the lowest level since 2003, mainly due to the health crisis, a health agency said. US extends travel restrictions at land borders with Canada and Mexico. The US government on Wednesday extended the closure of land borders with Canada and Mexico to non-essential travel such as tourism until August 21st. Fauci flips out. President Biden's top health official has crumbled after a Republican senator presented evidence that he approved funding for research at a Chinese lab. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul flatly accused White House Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci of lying to Congress at a Senate Health Committee meeting. Spain. PP opposes the decree that relaxes the use of face masks. The PP voted this Wednesday in Congress against validating the decree law that put an end to the mandatory use of face masks outdoors, which will not only prevent the rule from being ratified with the yes of Ciudadanos together with the government parties and the abstentions of other groups. Spain lowers VAT on electricity in the midst of escalating prices. The Spanish Congress of Deputies on Wednesday approved the temporary reduction of VAT on electricity in order to limit the impact on consumers of the escalating price of electricity accentuated in recent days of high temperatures. Earthquakes in Panama. A strong earthquake of magnitude 6.8 was registered this July 21, 49 kilometers south of the Panamanian town of Punta Burica, province of Chiriquí. The telluric movement occurred around 21:15 Greenwich Mean Time in the Pacific Ocean at the depth of 10 kilometers. According to local media, the earthquake was strongly felt in the southern part of the country, where several people have to evacuate their buildings. In some localities, there were also power outages and communications were affected. Another earthquake of magnitude 3.3 was also detected almost at the same time, with its focus located on land 21 kilometers from the town of Maracacas, Los Santos province, at a depth of 8 kilometers. Yoga, a tool for emotional management. Yoga, besides being an ancient practice that seeks balance between mind and body, it's also a powerful tool for emotional management that can help to cope with fear, sadness, or anxiety, and to enhance positive attitudes. So says psychologist Ana Alfaro, who points out that in her book, Yoga to Balance Your Emotions, she details techniques to find well-being for any stage of life and not only for this turbulent time. Strange. Mysterious disease blinding birds. Wildlife experts are studying a mysterious affliction that is leaving birds blind and dying. Since early June, the Ohio Wildlife Center identified multiple cases of an unknown disease in songbird species, but the disease has also been identified in other states, including Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, Indiana, and West Virginia. Symptoms include a white crust on the bird's eyes that causes blindness and damage to their nervous system, preventing them from flying. Indiana, to build on the Go wireless charging for electric vehicles on highway, the Indiana Department of Transportation has begun the first phase of a project to transform a segment of the state's highway into a wireless charging pavement for electric vehicles. The transport of the future. 400 students from 11 universities around the world are presenting this week at the Polytechnic University of Valencia the most innovative prototypes of the Hyperloop, considered the transport of the future, which will allow passengers and goods to be transported at speeds of more than 1,200 kilometers per hour in a totally sustainable way. China debuts in new maglev train capable of reaching 600 kilometers per hour. China on Tuesday debuted its new magnetic levitation train, also known as maglev. The production line launch ceremony took place in the coastal city of Qingdao, Shandong province. The train is currently considered to be the fastest land vehicle in the world. Amazon wins approval for radar device to monitor sleep. Amazon received a waiver from the Federal Communications Commission to use radar to monitor people's sleep. The document released last Friday describes a device that includes a radar sensor for non-contact sleeping tracking. Cop encounters Bigfoot in West Texas. A West Texas patrol officer has described a harrowing encounter with a Bigfoot while in a specific part of the county. Another officer encountered a Bigfoot in the same area a year later. In quotes, "I was sitting in the truck, head back, enjoying my little break. I had closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, I looked out into the cornfield and made direct eye contact with something. At first, I thought it was a person and almost had a heart attack right there. The thing was about 6 feet tall. Its eyes were human, but they glowed in the night like animal eyes. I'm not a weak man. I've done more stupid and foolish things in my time than I care to remember. I have been afraid before, and I am not above admitting it. However, there was something about those eyes that absolutely terrified me." Close quotes. Long period oscillations discovered on the Sun. Solar physicists have discovered global oscillations of the Sun with very long periods, comparable to the solar rotation period of 27 days that translate into deep, low musical notes. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.